Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Champions of Self Visual Podcast. I'm Ben Eden, your host, and I'm excited to welcome with us today Stephanie McCauley. She is a young professional and a founder of a group called Unbenched. It's a group or a community designed to support and motivate young adults. Hello, Stephanie.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
No problem. So, Stephanie and I met on LinkedIn, and I found a lot of things about her that we had in common. She's getting into the HR world, and I was in HR. She's a young adult. I'm a young adult. She spends a lot of time with young adults and had some awesome comments on LinkedIn. So I figured it would be important to connect with her and even invite her to this podcast. So Stephanie, I'm glad you came.
Yeah, thank you.
So Stephanie, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So again, I'm Stephanie or Steph McCauley, and I'm a leadership and management trainer and culture consultant. But I'm also the founder of a young adult group called Unbenched. So at Unbenched, we provide purposeful activities and conversations to inspire, motivate, and support young adults in all aspects of their life. So we do that through community service, socials, member speeches, and discussion groups, things like that. So I'm all about leadership, bringing people together, and making life worthwhile together.
Good. And what
Yeah.
inspired you to get Unbenched together or to found that?
Kind of a lot of different things. I found myself after college struggling a little bit to kind of find kind of a home in a community. Growing up, I was always on a sports team or in a club or a sorority, or I just had a big group of family friends, and I just was always a part of something bigger than myself. And then I found outside of college, it's a lot harder to find kind of a group and something to be a part of besides work. And I noticed that was missing from my life. And I noticed a lot going on with my friends. There was just something missing, and it was hard to find friends. I got super lucky and found a group of friends. But I just noticed with colleagues, it was just really hard for people to find other young adults to just be social with. And I also found it super hard to find an environment to kind of talk about things and kind of have an outlet. So I kind of put all of those things together and created Unbenched just to help support the whole self. So it's not just networking and work focus. It's not just emotional. It's everything that people need. So that's how I started it.
Perfect. I like that. You mentioned some important things that happen to everybody, but not everybody talks about frequently enough, in my opinion. Where you said, like how would I phrase it? A change in life, right? A change in
Hmm.
routine where you're used to following a goal, going to high school, going to college, going after this, that's this. And once you finish it, and you're like, well, now what?
Hmm.
And the group of friends changed, your goals changed, and that happens in life all the time. So we go through a change in emotions as well because we
Hmm.
figure some uncertainty, not exactly sure what we should do, where we should go, who to hang out with. And so I think that's a good segue for what we're going to talk about today with emotional pain. Now, I wanted to define emotional pain today because some people might see it and think, well, that's trauma, and I haven't really had trauma.
Hmm.
But emotional pain, I define it as a discomfort or a feeling of discomfort that we have when we have unresolved emotions. So that can come from a change, like I graduated college, now what? Or I no longer work in this job, now what? My something I want to quickly say is about labels. Sometimes we define ourselves by what we do, right? I worked in HR. Oh, I no longer do. So who am I? I was a soccer player. I no longer am. So who am I? Things like that,
Hmm.
right? And it causes some emotions to come into our brain, and it's a little confusing. So that emotional pain, if emotions stay unresolved, then they can turn into emotional pain. So with that definition in mind,
Hmm.
Stephanie, how do you see it um, affect young adults in work or in your group or in life, or what's your perspective?
Hmm. I think it affects people a lot, and a lot more than people even realize. I know that I didn't realize like what I was going through. And my friends, I never I never grew up with anxiety. I think that's a big one right now. But after college, I just started seeing it everywhere. I started seeing it in people I knew. I was also advisor for a sorority, and I saw it in them, and it just was something that I wasn't used to or never had a label to it. Depression, anxiety, and all these things, but they affect you. And you think that, you have your home life and your work life, but I always say you have one life. It's just you. So if something is going wrong at work, it's going to affect your social life and what happens at home, and vice versa. If something's going on at home, it's going to affect how you work. And that's kind of what I was seeing in myself. So I was going through some stuff at work. I thought that I could hide it. But I couldn't. I guess it was super obvious to my my friends and family that it just wasn't the same. And that's another big reason why I started Unbenched is because people just need a place where they can talk about these things, that they don't even know that they're necessarily going through. So at Unbenched, people will come in and we just have conversations, and we go on tangents, we go on different topics. Each night is focused on one person, and it just goes to show when one person shares their story, another person's like, oh, me too. Oh, that happened to me. That happened to me. And it's like, oh, wow, we have all this stuff going on and nobody's talked about it. I'm not by myself. So I've noticed that it is huge, especially in the younger generations, the millennial generations that grew up with social media and technology, who's kind of stole some of this face-to-face interaction and this community that people don't have. And I think that's what causes a lot of this pain is we don't know how to deal with it, and we don't know what to do, and we need other people to kind of help us through that, because it can be scary.
100%. So with the people in your group or the people you interact
Mm-hmm.
with, do you find that this subject of emotional pain is like, only certain people deal with it? Or do you find people almost relieved when they have a chance to talk about it?
A little bit of both. I think it's still one of those things that people feel embarrassed about it, that they, have these struggles or have these problems, especially like you had said, it's not trauma, like nobody died, nothing really bad happened. So like, why should I feel bad that my job is kind of sucky, or I don't have that many friends. Um, so I think sometimes people are embarrassed about it, but also when I can get them together on a bunch unbenched, they feel a lot of relief. I remember somebody came to the group and he said, I don't really like emotional stuff. It makes me super uncomfortable. But all I know is I felt a lot better when I left. So even if you're not ready to talk about it, if you can just be in a group of people where it's okay to talk about and listen to other people's story and other people talk about it, you might pick up on something. So I think it's still kind of something that people don't feel awesome talking about, but I think that they need to, and a lot of people know that they need to. It's just providing that safe place where they can.
Hmm. I like that. Yeah, there's the thought of how we base our emotions off of how we think we should feel, right?
Yes.
We look at
Mhm.
others and say, well, they don't look like they're feeling this way, so why do I? And therefore there
Mhm.
must be something wrong with me. So in the
Right.
end, we just need to give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling,
Mhm.
right? I
Absolutely.
like I like what you've been mentioning about the ability to share each other's stories,
Mhm.
in your group and when people just come together in that safe environment. So, as part of my podcast, I always ask the guest to share a story of theirs. So, could you share an example that you've had of when you've had some emotional pain and how you overcame it?
Sure. I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll kind of dive a little deeper. A few years ago, I had just kind of a job that just wasn't for me. I didn't feel valued at work. It was super repetitive. Um, I just never felt good going to work or leaving work, and it really just drained on me. Um, I didn't think it, highlighted um, my skills or things that I was good at, and I was just kind of there. And when you go through that day after day after day, it begins to wear on you, and it started wearing on me, and it started getting into my home life and where my friends and family, kind of noticed that I just wasn't as spunky and crazy and loud as I usually was. I was just always like kind of whatever. And um, I knew I needed to make a change, but I didn't really know how, and I was scared to admit that. So I think the first step was admitting that I wasn't happy. Um, I had to like tell myself like this isn't okay, you're not okay. So that was the biggest thing for me. And then I had to kind of confide in somebody. It was my mom and my boyfriend who really kind of had that talk with me, like, we got to make changes. And so I think that's really important, if to find somebody in your life that you can go through it with, and you don't have to do it alone. And so those two people kind of really pushed me. And the next thing was I had all these fears. Well, if I don't work here, like where am I going to work? How am I going to pay rent? I need money, like obviously, like how am I going to live? It takes a long time to find a job. It was like all these big fears. And so I had to slow down and go back and say, okay, well, what's really the worst that could happen? Okay, I quit. I move back in with my parents. I move into a friend's house. I'm not going to be on the streets. I'm not going to be begging for food. The worst that could happen wasn't actually that bad. And so I had to kind of take all those different fears and knock them out. So, okay, well, I have to tell my roommate. She's my best friend. She'll understand. I need to find a sublet. Okay, I can do that. I can find a sublet. Not the end of the world. Okay, what do I love? What do I do outside of work? This is what, make a list. This is the type of work I should be doing. So it's taking all those huge fears and making them a little bit smaller. Really, really helped me, and taking and just kind of realizing that the worst wasn't really that bad. So those are some of the things that I did, and ended up, of course, all working out. I wasn't begging on the street. Everything was fine. So that was just a big part of my story, was really having to touch base with myself and admit what I was going through, and challenging myself to take the steps to get out of a bad situation, and using a community and people to help me get there. So that's a little bit about my story, and I know that's very similar to a lot of people in Unbenched and a lot of people I know. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you for
yeah,
sharing.
of course.
Have you ever read the book by Dale Carnegie called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living?
I have not.
Well, you quoted it pretty well.
Good.
as, far, as far as how to break apart your fears, you think of what the worst could happen, and then you break it apart and you say, you know what? If it happens, okay. Or actually, it probably won't happen. So you did a great job with that.
Thanks.
Good skills there.
Yeah.
Then I like how you had mentioned it beforehand about what
Mm-hmm.
some people define as trauma versus what emotional pain is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but your experience with the job is extremely valid.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all of us had the cancer or the death or the abuse or those kinds of things. But when we go through those experiences of work where we're just not happy, where things happen at work where we're not appreciated, those feelings are real and valid.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all emotions that we need to learn how to deal with. So I'm glad you shared a story like that.
Of course.
Let's spend a few more minutes, if you would,
Yeah.
talking a little bit more about how you came to be okay taking these steps. You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
your family and boyfriend, people who noticed that you weren't okay, helped you with that.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit more, because some of the listeners might be saying, yeah, you know what, I am unhappy, or I do have unresolved emotions, but I just don't know how to get there, or I'm not sure if I'm ready to do anything about it. Can you
Mm-hmm.
speak a little bit more on how you got to be ready to take care of your emotions?
Yes. I think sometimes I felt like I hit rock bottom, and there's only one way, and that was up, because I just couldn't take it anymore. I remember thinking, I can't step in this office one more day. It was, I just had a breaking point, and if it wasn't for that breaking point, I don't know if I would have made those steps. I mean, I should have quit long, long before I did. But it took me, that whole year to be like, to hit that point. Um, so I think it is really hard to take those first steps, and it's just about getting real with yourself and accepting that it's okay. I'm feeling this emotion. Okay, what am I going to do about it? Find somebody to help me through it. And if you don't have anybody, there's still so many resources out there, and it's just about getting your head right. And whether that's starting to eat right and working out, or just doing things that you really enjoy, those things help get your head right. And when you have, dopamine and good energy, you're a lot more likely to make those changes. So when you're down in the dumps, that you're just like, how can I get this energy, and find those ways that work for you to gain that energy. And then each day you just build on it just a little bit, a little bit, a little bit.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, this has been a great conversation, and I feel like it has been a very genuine conversation about just what happens in life and that we can get through those types of emotions.
Yeah.
You've also shared great advice in step-by-step form that people can follow to get through their own emotions. So, as I tell everybody all the time, emotions are normal, they're valid, and we should give ourselves permission to feel what we're feeling
Mhm.
and to know that we're okay. We don't have to compare ourselves to others. Um, okay, Stephanie, how can people get in touch with you on social media?
Yes, you can go to unbenched.org. You can also follow Unbenched on Instagram and Facebook, and I run all of those, so I will answer if you follow or message us. You can also email us at unbenchedllc@gmail.com, and I would love to connect and follow all of you.
Perfect. Well, this has been another episode of the Champions of Self Visual podcast with Stephanie McCauley. We thank you for joining today, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.